How are we reducing our travel, decarbonization across our supplier base to make sure that our entire supplier ecosystem has a reducing carbon footprint going forward. Real actions, real metrics, real impact, and real brand. Big driver for reputation as well as brand messages going forward. Thank you. I cannot say how excited I am to meet people who are not my team or my family or recently fresh coming off of a rather interesting session with COVID in the ICU, and it's been a rather difficult phase, I would say. Changes your perspective about life and everything else around it. But just a quick 30 seconds about myself, taking out of the 9 minutes that I have. My name is Bianca and I'm currently the Chief Storyteller and Head of CEO Communications for a technology company. It's called Wipro. Many of you will know Wipro, 75 years in this country, right? Currently in the middle of a massive transformation, but also moving its headquarters from Bangalore in India to France. And a little earlier, we actually heard Sanjay, you talking about this interesting shift from marketing to business. And Amit, you talked about it as well. So that question was really relevant for me. Because after spending a whole career reporting to CMOs, I've now moved into the CEO's office, reporting directly to the CEO. And it's an interesting role where I'm trying to basically figure out what Wipro should be in the next 5 years. So basically sitting down with the board and trying to understand what is our narrative, how do we change it, how do we understand what's happening in the market, synthesize it, have a response to it, how do we make sure that everything that we're saying internally and externally, they basically align, right? And aside of that, I'm also basically heading up his communications and doing a little bit of work around inclusion and diversity, something that's a passion project of mine. And before that, I've spent about 8 to 9 years working with different CMOs in different companies, HCL Tech, Weber Shandwick, etc. And a little before that, I've spent about a decade with Anthony's friends, Lata and Anuj, on the journalism side. So I was, with CNBC, NDTV, Reuters, etc. So that's my journey. And when Vatsal said that, why don't you talk a little bit about future gazing? So I kept thinking that, what can I go back to my discussions with our board and our CEO in the last, let's say, 2 or 3 months specifically, because we were all coming out of the pandemic and then the second wave hit, some of us more personally than others. And what can we think of in terms of a large organization with 200,000 people in 66 countries? What should we be doing? And so I realized that now is possibly the time that people like us, right, brand leaders and business leaders, when we're starting to think about not just looking into the past processes and the past products, but also gazing into the future and really trying to understand and look out for the innovations and the technology and the human challenges that will shape our future. And so I said that, okay, maybe at this point, we all need to be a little bit more ambidextrous than we've been before. We've got to take some calls, tough calls. We have to be able to take those tipping points that we arrive at. And I thought, okay, maybe 2 things that I could table in front of you. One being, how do we think about all this divisive discourse that's happening all around us and change that into positive employee activism? Because we've got 200,000 people all around the globe and different people have different passions. Now, this is not new. The reason we've been debating this, and I thought I'll table this with all of you and hear your voices and your thinking around this, was the Haiti earthquake, for example, what's happening with the Taliban in Afghanistan, or the persecution of minorities around us, or the refugee crisis, for example. And right now, thankfully, billions and billions of people are actually talking about this. They feel very strongly about this. But we've seen in the past that companies have really tried to stay on the right side of history, stay on the right side of conversations, and they failed time and again. But maybe this is a good time for brands, right, small and big, from different industries, to start thinking about how do we shift those conversations that are happening on social media, that are happening internally within teams, and sort of shift those passions and those sentiments into actual advocacy, viable advocacy. From a company standpoint, how can we back that? And I don't have an answer for that. Even at Wipro, we're trying to figure out how do we do this, because this is almost like shooting the rapids, right? If you handle it well, it can go really well for your brand. It could also, but it's also something that's very difficult to contain. It's fast moving. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what you are all thinking about, but this is absolutely an area that we are moving into. So essentially just thinking about how do we move into employee advocacy. So that was one. The other thing that we're actually doing, and I'll give an example of this, and I personally believe that sustainability is literally the next brand message. And this is happening everywhere, right? So what we've seen particularly with the UN's IPCC report last month, which pretty much shook up everybody. What with the COP26 that's coming up in November in Glasgow, right? Which every global brand is going to be participating in, including Wipro. And I think with the world also warming at above 1.1 degree, if I'm not wrong, we're now at a now or never opportunity. Okay, let me rephrase that. Now or never necessity where we need to shift into more sustainable business models and make ESG a central pivot of our brand messages. And speaking of Wipro, obviously, we've done that, I would say, in the last 20 years, but never really talked about it. Wipro is a very conservative company, being very shy of talking about the work that we're doing with the community, for example, with the founder chairman who spent more than $22 billion in community work, but never wanted to talk about it. It was difficult for us to talk about all the work that we're doing in terms of our decarbonization, etc., etc. So what the marketing team, and it's been interesting because I've been on the sidelines of this, but helped it shape a little bit. Of course, we've got our seasonal campaigns, right? Cybersecurity, cloud, is that and the other. But we have an ongoing campaign for the last 3 months, which is called A Future for All, right? And it's not a sustainability campaign, it's a brand campaign. Because we realize that at this point in time, everything that we're doing essentially is around how we are a sustainable business and we're having a less and less footprint on the ecology and the community around us. And obviously, we are talking about this with our employees, they're championing this, and our customers absolutely love the fact that everything that we're doing is moving to a path of net zero. So we made an announcement about moving to a net zero emissions positioning by 2040. But we're also committing to a 55% target, reaching that by 2030. Now that's a big target. But we're making sure that our campaign is not just talk. So our campaign is actually fueled by things that we're doing. So how are we reducing our travel footprint, for example? How are we completely transforming the air conditioning in our very large campuses across the globe, or especially in India, where we have anywhere between 40 to 60,000. How are we actually doing a deep decarbonization across our supplier base to make sure that our entire supplier ecosystem has a reducing carbon footprint going forward? How are we increasing our renewable energy purchases every year going forward? And so real actions, real metrics, real impact, and real brand. And so I think that's essentially going to be big driver for reputation as well as brand messages going forward. I personally think that trust, brand trust, and ESG is now interlinked. And I also think that possibly sustainability is essentially going to be that one big driver of reputation going. So yeah, that's my key takeaway from the conversations I'm having with our leadership and with our customers. And I'd love to hear a little bit from each of you, perhaps, what you're doing in terms of your footprint, carbon footprint. How are you bringing that to the center of your brand messages? How are you making sure that everything that you're doing has that element of sustainability built into it, and you're able to showcase that as a key element of who you stand for as a brand and what your values are? So, any thoughts? I'd love to hear from you.
My question is, everything is good, branding is good, everybody's liking it, the campaign ran well. End of the year, you sit at the boardroom, present to the board that this is how much I spent. The next question comes, Nanda kitna aaya? Isse, how do you handle that? Those kind of questions, if you get it.
It's tough, obviously, and I have to say that it has to start from the top. So I'll give you an example. So my role, for example, has never existed in Wipro ever. I've now spent a little under 4 years in the company. But when I joined the company, it was a pure luck, and I said, you know what, this is an interesting role they're carving out, and it might just be the best 2 years of my life or the worst 2 years, in which case it won't be 2, it'll be much less than that. But I took that chance, right? Somebody took a chance on me. Similarly, when our new CEO joined, and he's not Indian, for the first time ever in the 75 years of the company, we have a guy who's heading the business who's not an Indian, right, based out of France. And his leadership is very different. His values are very different. He believes in authenticity. He believes in actually walking the talk. So when he has these conversations in the boardroom, I'm a fly in the wall where I sit in the boardroom and kind of get to hear what they're talking about. But of course, there are questions which says that yes, but why have we not been able to guide for a margin X, but we've not been able to get there? But again, this is the conviction of the leadership which says that this is the right thing to do. We have to do this, even if that means we're spending 10x on our aviation fuel that we're going to buy from, let's say, a Shell, which is a developmental product that's going to cost us 10x more, but it's going to have a less and less carbon footprint. We're going to do it. So I guess it just depends on the conviction, and you have to write it out. Thank you so much.